Dotted around Staffordshire, Cheshire, Shropshire and North Wales are many meres and mosses, which formed in depressions or kettle holes in the glacial deposits when the ice sheets retreated around 15,000 years ago. The meres and mosses in around Aylesmere in Shropshire are perhaps the most famous and spectacular.
Generally speaking, it was the deeper depressions left by the ice that became the meres, and the shallower ones that developed from meres into peat bogs. But of course there are always exceptions, and one of them is hidden away here at Chartley in Staffordshire. This is Chartley Moss, a rather special place. Believe it or not, I'm walking on water. I am standing precariously on top of an underground lake that is much as 13 metres deep in places. Keeping it out of sight is a carpet of floating peat beneath my feet, which is formed in places from as little as 10 centimetres up to 3 metres thick. Chartley Moss is a very rare example of a floating peat bog, also known as a swing moor. It is one of only 5 sites in England, and at 109 acres or 44 hectares, it's the largest.
When encouraged to do so, areas of the ground here shake or quake beneath your feet. Swing moor aptly describes the bog's swinging or undulating nature. What at first appears to be solid heathland is in fact a matted carpet of sphagnum moss and peat, floating upon a deep, dark lake of water.
Please be aware that Chartley Moss is a very dangerous place. The peat bog above the underground lake in some places is so thin that you could fall through it and you would not be able to escape the water. For this reason, the site is off limits unless accompanied by an experienced and approved guide. A bog or a moss is a mere that accumulates peat. So what exactly is peat? Well, peat is simply dead plant material, mainly in the case of Chartley, this stuff, sphagnum moss. Generally, bogs occur in cool climates where the surface water is acidic and low in nutrients, resulting in slow plant growth. Saturated soil slows down decay, causing the peat to build up. Large areas of landscape can be covered many metres deep in peat.
If Chartley is so very deep, how come it's become a moss and is not a mere? The formation of Chartley Moss is intriguing. Swing moor generally begin life as shallow acid lakes whose surfaces slowly vegetate over with sphagnum moss and other bog plants. However, preserved pollen grains within the peat deposits here suggest that Chartley developed very differently. It seems that around 5,000 years ago, the western basin comprised of a shallow depression in the bedrock, supporting wet birch woodland on the surface, which sphagnum moss was beginning to accumulate, the embryonic stage for a normal raised peat bog. The floating bog was created by the dissolving of salt deposits in underlying rocks around 100 metres down. This created a large hollow below the raised peat bog, which was then filled in by groundwater, creating an underground acidic lake. This dissolving of salt in the underlying rock caused at least 3 subsidences over the centuries and allowed water to flow underneath. Gradually, a sphagnum-dominated community developed on a floating raft. The last and largest subsidence was in the 15th century.
Measurements here in the western basin show that the reservoir beneath my feet is up to 13 metres deep in places. It is pudding basin shaped and has a floating raft of peat on top of it, which is up to 3 metres thick and covers 25 hectares. But Chartley Moss's most striking feature are the scattering of dead pine trees which stick out of the moss like sentinels. They look like victims of acid rain or some dreadful disease.
The reason for their demise is more unusual. During the 19th century, efforts were made to drain the moss. The adjacent ground was planted with a crop of Scots pines. Seeds from the Scots pines found the drier moss to their liking, and the pine woodland spread onto the moss.
What has happened is the self-seeded Scot pines, when reaching a critical height and weight, have punched a hole through the peat, forcing their roots into the acidic water, and they've drowned. Collectively, they give this part of the reserve a very prehistoric feel. Watch out for pterodactyls. The carcasses are left as habitat for insects including some rare but choosy beetles which prefer upright dead to fallen dead pines.
Chartley Moss supports a typical range of bog plants including 6 species of sphagnum moss, roundleaf sundew and common cotton grass. Many occur in quantity. Some, like the bog rosemary, have been increasing recently. Although there are no really rare bog plants, taken all together, Chartley Moss is possibly the best site of this type in lowland Britain. Other plants include common heather, cross-leaved heath, cranberry, bilberry, wavy hairgrass and purple moorgrass. Among other animals, badgers live on the edge of the bog basin, and adders, slowworms and common lizards find Chartley Moss to their liking.
Here in the middle of the moss we have an opening known as Shooter's Pool. This may have been cut in the early 19th century to attract wildfowl to this part of the moss, but inadvertently has created Chartley's most spectacular attraction. There are an amazing 22 recorded species of dragonflies recorded here, of which 16 are regular breeders. Some are quite uncommon, like this white-faced darter.
The acidic nature of the bog waters here make it unsuitable for fish, one of the natural predators of dragonfly larvae, leaving the insect to go forth and multiply in peace.
Although some of the larger dragonflies look quite fearsome, they are all completely harmless to humans, but they will devour other insects. An old name for damselflies was the devil's darning needles. This stems from an old myth that if you want to sleep by water on a summer's day, damselflies would use their long, thin bodies to sew your eyelids shut. I still have to be careful not to drop off.
At the shortest, a dragonfly's life cycle, from egg to the death of the adult, is about 6 months. Some of the larger dragonflies take 6 or 7 years. Most of this time is spent in the larval form, beneath the water surface, catching other invertebrates. The small damselflies can live for a couple of weeks as free-flying adults. The larger dragonflies can live for 4 months in their flying stage. Most damsels, however, rarely go more than a week, and dragons 2 or 3 weeks. They die from accidents and predation, and sadly large numbers from starvation, as in poor weather neither they nor their prey can fly. No insect actually lives for only 1 day, not even the fabled mayfly.
Chartley Moss is one of only 5 sites in England and the most southerly location in the UK for the white-faced darter. It's also the only place you find it in Staffordshire. Its face may be white, but its dark colour helps it warm up easily, allowing it to survive in cooler climates. This is a female teneral white-faced darter, so she emerged this morning.
Okay, this is a white-faced darter exuviae, so once the larvae has crawled out of the water when it's ready to emerge as an adult, it leaves behind this case. Typical acid-loving trees and shrubs occur in the surrounding woodland, like rowan, holly and alder buckthorn, the latter sustaining a large brimstone butterfly population. There is some silver but mostly hairy birch trees and Scots pine. The pine trees are thought to be the descendants of the 19th century timber crop.
All also root happily on the Western Raft, where Natural England are fighting a long-running battle removing the birch and the pine scrub to restore the original bog surface.
While it can look like fun, making the bog shake, it is actually highly dangerous. A BBC website asks, is Chartley Moss the most dangerous place in Staffordshire? Because of this, the delicate nature of the site, and that Chartley Moss is privately owned, it can only be accessed by permit, mainly for study and research purposes.
Guided visits can be specially arranged for groups and individuals by contacting Chartley Moss Senior Reserve Manager on the phone number below. All contact details can be found on the Natural England website. Thanks for joining me today at Chartley Moss.
Yes! We've got a big one! Right. Look at the size of that one. Right. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, 3.
It's got in my hair again.